Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Inside Story podcast, where we take you behind the scenes of building diverse businesses and becoming a successful entrepreneur. I'm your host, Tursun Halimova, a business coach and facilitator on a mission to help build impactful businesses. And today, my guest is Panos Meintanis, who is the founder and CEO of DealsUp. It is a Luxembourg-based sales accelerator company providing sales training and coaching to startups and scale-ups. Panos aims to make effective sales training accessible to startups, as well as help startups achieve their growth and revenue targets. Panos, it's great to have you on the Inside Story podcast. Welcome.
Likewise, Dursun. Thanks for having me. It's great.
To start off, I would love to read several unfinished sentences, and I would ask you to finish them for us, please.
All right, let's do it.
Here's the first one. Being an entrepreneur means
A lot of ups and downs every day.
building an impactful business requires
High resilience and a high performance sales team.
failure is
Unavoidable.
success is a result of,
Trying again and again.
and the last one, being fulfilled in life means.
Something personal to everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Panos, for sharing those insights. Hopefully that gives our audience a little bit of glimpse of who you are and what you think in terms of entrepreneurship. It is an exciting conversation today because I think you bring such a rich sales experience and sales background, which I think could be so instrumental for a lot of our listeners who most of them are entrepreneurs and they have businesses that they hope to grow. And so hopefully this conversation will provide them with some practical takeaways, as well as share your own personal story of how you built your sales career. And now you are in a position to advise and coach startups in sales related topics. So to give an idea to our listeners, you have spent over a decade working in software startups and scale ups, both as a salesperson, but as well as leading sales team, managing sales teams. Now you have channeled that experience into founding your own company, DealsUp, to help startups achieve their revenue targets. Can you briefly share what DealsUp does and how you support startups in building effective sales strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned it quite well before, but when it comes down to the core, so DealsUp is a B2B sales training company specialized in startups. So we help both startups and scale ups with what I see one of the biggest challenges, and it's selling more. We do that through sales training, strategy, coaching, but in an actionable way and without costing an arm and a leg to those startups. So for early startups, it's usually around bringing their product to market, by giving them the knowledge, the frameworks, and the tools to kind of start signing the first customers, validate hypotheses, get that very valuable customer feedback. For startups, kind of in the next stage, which is post product market fit, we help them become more predictable with the revenue by introducing sort of repetitive processes, sales methodologies, and just overall framing what works really well in a scalable way. And last but not least, when it comes to high growth startups, we help them navigate the challenges that come with that growth, from making new people productive soon through onboarding processes to raising kind of the status quo of the sellers by building a sales enablement or training function internally.
Oh, great. And you personally have an extensive experience working at startups, right? From very early stage to a scale up stage. Your sales journey began, almost a decade ago at Talkwalker, which is one of the few successful startups here in Luxembourg. It is a consumer intelligence and social listening platform that was recently acquired by Hootsuite, a global leader in social media management. Can you take us back to those early days? If you still remember how you started at Talkwalker, what was it like to join and grow alongside a startup, which I'm assuming was quite fast-paced as well as challenging environment? You transitioned from junior sales roles to senior sales roles. So if you could maybe take us back to those early days. Also, how did that experience at Talkwalker shape your approach to sales in general?
All right. Well, there's a lot to unpack. Maybe let's start with kind of the early days. Yeah, so Talkwalker was my first real sales job. It was back in 2015 now. I started as a sales representative for what it was called the UK market. From there, I moved to selling to the international market, so both across MENA region and APAC regions. Before then, I stepped up to sales leadership roles, managing teams here in Europe and the US, so San Francisco for a while. So the last few years, I was in charge of sales training and overall go-to-market enablement, and I had 6 trainers globally reporting to me at that time. Look, I always say, startups are the best place to grow as a professional, especially if you manage to get into a high growth startup. There's just more opportunities. It was a time where you start wearing different hats, even though your role is called sales. You have to prepare for an event you go to. You do everything from A to Z, and just trying to figure things out. And I remember at my first days, I was just given access to a CRM. It was Salesforce at the time, and that was my entire onboarding. It was like, all right, just go and do it. And don't even get me started on the interview process even before that. But it was an interesting time for sure. It was 10 years ago, startups weren't, obviously, they were a lot less equipped to what they are now. We didn't have access to tech and tools and go to market things very easily, or they cost a fortune. And we also weren't as informed as today. There was literature, books, things like this, but it wasn't, I couldn't go on LinkedIn and just see a bunch of really good advice on there. I was also very inexperienced, but I was lucky enough to have a good manager at the time who was a mentor to me and still is. Look, I made all the mistakes you could possibly imagine, all of them. I recall one of my first calls, the CEO of Americas at the time, he just wanted to join the call and listen into one of my calls. And then right after, my manager had a call with me and he said, "Hey, what happened on that call? Because this is what I was told." And pretty much, I'm going to sum up in the conversation as a pretty much a question mark whether was I in the right role, was it in the right company. So this is how bad it was initially. Yeah, so the first few years were obviously, really pivotal for me. Very tough learning fundamental sales, making mistakes, correcting them. The learning part was pretty much a full-time job on top of my full-time job and the targets that I had. And the speed of which things changed was really impressive. I joined a team of 5 people. The year after, that doubled. And it kind of kept doubling until we had almost 300 sellers at the time, right?
Wow.
I still remember the first time somebody sold what we used to call just like an annual deal, like a yearly deal. Everybody up until that time, we were just selling 2 months, 3 months, and we couldn't think it was possible to even go in and sell a 1-year deal. That's kind of the situation we were in. So we're trying to find a footing as a company. Talkwalker had some customers, but I don't think we were fully on a product market fit. And I don't think I sold my own deal actually until probably over a year after. Which, looking back now, I think it was the right thing to do. I figured, winning deals was more important, even that meant, involving my manager or others looking down on me. Is like, oh, look, he always involves his manager or whatever. But soon after, kind of the sense of being lost sort of slowly went away after my first year, and I found my own persona, and in a way, after selling a bunch of times, I came to that realization that it wasn't just luck. Initially, I was like, okay, I signed this deal. It's probably just, I'm out of luck. And so as I saw kind of deals coming through, started giving me that confidence that I didn't have, right? And that confidence turned into ambition, and somewhere there, my mindset changed. And I was no longer happy with kind of the small deals, and had clear financial goals for me. I wanted to buy a place and travel and see things. And so there was almost like a natural shift, therefore, mindset wise, that gave me that confidence to go and step up to a leadership team after. And then from there, to more leadership positions. I was also fortunate enough to, through those years at Talkwalker, to report to different people, maybe a little bit too often. But I reported to the head of sales for some time, to the founder, then to a CRO, then to a COO, then back to the founder. And that was a fantastic experience to see how different functions operate, how different people think, how they're measured, how they kind of affect the organization's performance, and how they also solve different challenges. So that to me was a big, big takeaway.
Mm. How did that experience shape your approach to sales? Especially also in regards to your point, right? You started as a very junior. You didn't make your first sell until what, almost a year, which I can only imagine how stressful that might have been. I personally, having worked in sales environment, there's a lot of external pressure as well as the internal pressure to perform. So I can only imagine how challenging that must have been for you to stick around and pursue and persevere. How did that experience shape your approach to sales? How did Panos change as a salesperson?
Yeah, maybe I can add a little bit of context. So I think that is slightly different to which company you start with, and there's a lot of variables to it. Like I think for any company that sells software, because that's where I was in, that is not a must-have. It's not like we weren't selling ERP, we weren't selling like CRM or cybersecurity. The rest of us have to grind a little bit more. The analogy I used back in that time, it's kind of like selling smartphones versus selling tablets. Everybody needs a smartphone, but not everyone really needs a tablet, right? And especially if you're selling something that's not like a commodity, like I said, or in a mature market, there's no brand awareness like in a startup. Um, you have to really kind of make a strong case with your buyer. Educate the buyers, or your prospects, qualify well enough, fight for budget internally, or get a good champion to do that internally for you. And I think that also helped me. It helped shape a little bit the way I was selling. Building resilience, but also understand that pitching features and functions just won't cut it for the type of sales I was in. Obviously, as an inexperienced seller, that at the time I didn't just wake up and think, okay, like, you know what, I need to be able to identify strong pain points or connect our solution to them. I just got really lucky. I had a very, very strong, like I said before, sales manager, and I'll probably say it again, who was just an amazing seller. First of all, he came from Gartner. He did all value selling. He was very, very good at it. And so that's kind of where some of these sales fundamentals were instilled into my sales philosophy as well. A lot of them kind of took inspiration out of a methodology called value selling. At the time, we used a lot of the fundamentals. One would be, people need a reason to change. You have to find strong pain points for people to change the status quo, or the solution is in the mind of the buyer. Was one that always stuck with me, meaning people don't like to be sold, they like to buy. And that, value is also both personal and professional. And if you can connect with your buyers and your prospects on a deeper level, you'll be able to also uncover not just what it means to the company to buy your software, but also to them. And a lot of these fundamentals, are still embedded in the way I sell or train today. They've just been adapted to easily applied to startups, and a lot of the times just removing the complexity around those. Another sales fundamental, before I forget, is that influenced me, was that people buy from people. And no matter what you do, that still stands today. I think sellers who can naturally connect on the same level with the prospect, both kind of having an executive presence, the emotional intelligence, but also have a good balance between professional and personal. I think that just can build better relationships with buyers. They can build or create better champions internally, the companies they sell to, which I think it helps a lot close deals, get referrals and so on. You agree with that one? I
I
see you
do, I
kind
do, yeah.
of.
I mean, this is one of the things I always also advise entrepreneurs who feel very uncomfortable with selling. I'm like, don't focus on selling, focus on building relationships, right? As to your point, people buy from people. And I think there has to be that connection, trust, and credibility for you to be able to make that sell. Yeah.
And one thing is to say, but there's another thing. There's skills that you build around building relationships as well. And there's also one thing that I still remember very clearly today. There was a person early in the Talkwalker days. I think she still works there, Charlotte, who was she was leading the French team. at the time, and she was crushing it. She was amazing. And so I was always fascinated by how people were successful. So I just went to her and I said, "Hey, what is it that you do that makes you successful?" And she said to me, "Look, in France, when somebody asks in the network if they know of a good social listening tool, people said, 'Yes, I know Charlotte, right? You should speak to Charlotte.' Not like, 'Yes, I know this platform called Talkwalker.'" And I think in kind of recent terms or current terms, that will be kind of the definition of the thought leader. So I said, "That's it, I'll do the same." And people still reach out to me today after a market I sold to back in 2017 to just ask me give me referrals or ask me like if I have time for a call, thinking I still work there. Yeah, so I can go on and on about, but I think kind of that ability to look at your territory or look at your job and be able to say, you know what, you got to be the CEO of your territory. You got to be able to give people, and I think in early startups, you have that possibility to work a territory, work a region, or work an entire market, and really just build that as if it's your own company.
Indeed, yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing this, Panos. And now you are currently advising, coaching, training startups on sales. What do you see as common mistakes or shortcomings that are done by startups, right? Especially when it comes to sales. What are they not doing so well in terms of sales?
Yeah, that topic comes up a lot, and
Yeah.
I generally think that the level of the average seller out there is low. And I don't think it's a startup thing, but it is especially in startups. And I'm not just saying this because I'm biased, right? But go and ask any buyer. Like, if their experience with salespeople has been moderately positive or let alone kind of exceptional. And I think you can start from there, besides the data and the research that we have to back that statement up. But there are many reasons I think for this. And we can spend hours debating the topic, but I think there are key aspects to consider here, right, that contribute to it. So the first one is, for most, myself included, sales is a profession that you fall into. There's no official kind of qualification and degree to be a seller, although I think people are trying to do that now. But you certainly won't get like, "Hey, I want to be a seller," when when you ask a kid, like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And so it's self-taught, right? But besides kind of the knowledge piece, I see a lot of sellers lacking enthusiasm for what they do. And I think perhaps it's because they're in the wrong company, selling the wrong product. I'm not sure. But what I'm trying to say here, I think, is when you become a developer, you most likely are passionate about coding and building software and solving challenges, right? When you become a teacher, I'm sure or hope most people are passionate about teaching, changing perspectives, you know, educating, things like that. And you see where I'm going with this, right? The sales one is quite a tricky one. There is, of course, a lot of very good sellers out there who just love selling. They love both the science and the art behind it. And I think another reason for the current status quo for sellers, it's probably the biggest one in my opinion, is the leaders that they report to. You can look at data on these or research, but I got lucky with my first manager. But for the majority of sellers, they don't really have a leader. They have maybe a manager. They're not inspired by them. They don't feel like they get a lot out of the interactions. They don't learn, and I think that's problematic. And the biggest gaps in kind of building skills today in the sales side actually sits with the manager, not with the sellers. Now, if you take really, really early startups as an example, this is even worse because some sellers report to founders, and if a large percentage of sales managers cannot mentor and train, the percentage of founders that do that is probably even greater. Okay, it's not all negative, by the way, but you asked that question, and yeah, and so there's also that whole overcomplicating, sales aspect. You read 5 books, and each one of them teaches a complete different way of how one should sell. That is only just from our literature. You go and you add the sales LinkedIn gurus and podcasts and webinars, and it's really confusing. I think imagine like a junior salesperson that's starting without a manager doing that for them. And this is why I believe that building fundamental skills is more important than asking just the budget questions or knowing how to ask this and that question. A good seller, I think, who can command respect, has connected with the prospect well, the buyer well, has understood the pain points that they have, and that the buyer has felt understood. This, two different people, one that does that well, one that doesn't, can ask the same question and they will get different answers.
Indeed, yeah.
So I'm less hung up on like the nitty and gritty part and more on the skill building side of things. And those things that I mentioned, they still produce sellers that pitch features and functions, that cannot just have a person-to-person conversation, that are unable to just listen to the person in front of them and dig deeper into the pain points and tell stories that buyers resonate with, and so on.
Yeah, no, it's so important. I agree with you on this one, because I think I personally have worked in different sales roles. I understood, for me at least, it was the easiest is to find my own style and to really lean into my own strengths, right? I am not a pushy salesperson. I would rather try to build rapport with the customer, even if it takes longer to close deals. That's kind of my route, and it always worked for me. And I think it's so important to really test different techniques, maybe not really get bogged down by specific skill, trying to master that, as opposed to learning people's skills, as you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be curious, ask questions, and then listen instead of trying to think about selling. Forget about selling for a moment, maybe try to understand the person. What are the problems? What are the pain points? And then from that place, I think anyone will be in a better position than to sell. And going back to the sales, I think, as I see it, and I don't know if you agree with me, I think every entrepreneur, founder, no matter the size of the business, it might be one person business or 100,000 people business, right? I think it is so fundamental for the founders to be able to sell. And oftentimes when I speak to founders of startups or other small businesses, there is a lot of hesitation, especially in Europe. In US, I think entrepreneurs are kind of comfortable with selling, but in Europe, I hear a lot of hesitation, and entrepreneurs say things like, I'm not good at selling, or I'll just hire a designated salesperson, right? Which can be a solution, yes. But I think it is fundamentally important for founders to be able to pitch and sell the products or services they're building. So what would you say to entrepreneurs who are hesitant, who would rather kind of designate this responsibility to someone else? Why is it important for entrepreneurs to develop, learn, and practice sales skills?
Yeah, interesting topic. Look, I get it. Selling can be intimidating for most founders, especially if they have a technical background and they never did it before. It can feel like you don't have the skills or the confidence or the know-how, or maybe your product is not ready in your opinion. That's another topic. But you might also be thinking that sales is often associated to what you mentioned before, which is that pushy kind of car sales type of selling. I think this is a mistake. First of all, whether you have done sales before or not, whether that was your official title or not, doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't done some sort of sales. Think of the last time, for instance, you convinced somebody to join your team. Well, that's kind of a sales thing. Or think of the last time you educated somebody about a topic. Educating is part of sales, right? Think of did you ever have to market something, right? That's sales. Have you listened to someone before who was sharing a concern about something that they have, and you thought of a solution, for instance, or recommendation to them? That's sales. So most likely, I think a lot of these founders have kind of the sales skills, and if they don't, sales is predominantly built up of little skills that are teachable, and so that's quite encouraging. Where I see this mental barrier breakdown in my interactions with founders is when I just ask them to describe to me, for instance, from a real experience, or to envision, what a good and a bad sales experience or a salesperson would look like, right? Just describe the two, and then ask them, which of these two would they rather be, right? With selling their platform or their services. the good seller or the bad seller. And guess what? The founders can decide that. They can decide to be that one person or the other person based on the descriptions. And founding sales isn't really supposed to be complicated, right? You just have to have a conversation with another person, try to see if they have a challenge that you can help them with, and just show them how you solve it with your product. And I think framing sales as a conversation between two people, like you mentioned before, and one trying to help another one overcome a challenge, usually helps them a lot, Now, on the topic of kind of outsourcing the sales part because they feel intimidated, or this is a very, very common mistake, and it's a very costly one. I think 9 out of 10 founders have tried to hire not just a salesperson too early, but like a head of sales or chief sales officer even. And if you as a founder, cannot sell your product or service, what makes you think that some random person will come in and do it? And outsourcing certain things can work actually early on, website development or software development to a certain extent. But the sales part is unfortunately something you cannot outsource, or I haven't seen it being done. And founding sales isn't only important because you get to validate, you can take a product to market, or because you cannot afford to hire somebody else, but it's the phase of the growth where you learn the most. You get feedback from early users. You have to pivot maybe your product and strategy, and all kinds of really, really critical things or topics happen at this stage. It's almost always better to ask somebody maybe from your engineering team to sell or to help, sell together than hire someone else. And there are many, questions you need to have answers to before you even start considering hiring somebody. Do you have a message fit? What I mean by that is, when you reach out to somebody, have you found a way where you get enough kind of responses to that to know, okay, if I say these kind of words, people usually respond to us and we can get a meeting? Did you validate kind of what your sales motion worked, right? Do you need to hire somebody who's very good at doing prospecting and outbound, or somebody that just does partner channel sales, or just takes in inbound leads? Because that could be a very junior person or a very, very senior person. Do you know what your average deal value is or deal size is? Are you selling to enterprise or to small businesses? What's your go-to-market motion? And all of this should inform who you should hire first and what the right fit is. And so if you try to do this before all these sort of elements I mentioned, very likely you're going to hire the wrong person. So maybe to recap a little bit, I think I would start with, to your question, start with removing prejudice about sales with kind of as a founder. You're not there to sell something, you're there to help somebody find a solution to a problem. Reach out to people. It's okay to message somebody who you don't know. Not everyone needs your solutions, but somebody does. If you wait for them to find you at that stage, you're probably betting on the wrong horse. And I think, just it helps because you can optimize very quickly for learnings, test things. If they don't work, change them and try again. If you have a team with you, you become less agile. It becomes more expensive and less feasible for you to kind of do that.
Indeed. I would actually argue that not just the founders, but the core team, the founding team, everyone ideally should be selling, right? And they are selling. Even if you think they are selling, or even if you think they're not selling, everyone is selling your product, your solution. So I think to that point, it's instrumental then to kind of focus developing these people skills, listening skills, ability to ask questions and then listen and figure out what is it that clients are really struggling with. And yeah, to your point, having that kind of how can I help? How can I serve the customers as opposed to selling, right? Maybe your product is not the right solution, and which is okay, but rather coming with the mindset of, okay, I'm here to help and to see if anyone needs my solution. I think maybe a better approach, and maybe also makes it easier to sell, right? Then yeah, you don't have that pressure. All right. Well, we're reaching the end, Panos. I wanted to ask maybe two other quick questions. One is, you've already kind of touched upon so many elements of sales, right? And especially as it relates to founders, entrepreneurs, how they can improve. What would you say your kind of go-to methods to improve sales skills, especially if these are entrepreneurs, founders with very limited resources, not just money, but also time. They have to wear multiple hats at the same time. What is the most effective way they can improve their selling skills?
Most effective and affordable. I think founders are obsessed with this whole idea of like, hey, we need to build this sales strategy and these and that, and it's going to cost us a lot of money, and maybe hire somebody to do that for us initially. And so certainly, I think as you grow, you need to start investing in a strategy and in a go-to-market that's a little bit more informed and formal in a way. But I think at this stage, I think founders really overcomplicate the whole idea of building lean teams and building a strategy and things. And there's really three things to kind of consider here at the very early stage. The first one is you need to figure out where your buyers like to interact. Where do they like to get informed, and where do they like to buy? Maybe it's the simplest, all three, right? Are they active on LinkedIn, for instance, or any other social media? Do they go to events? Basically, where are you most likely to spend the least amount of resources with the most ROI to speak to these people? So that's the first one. And here, if outbound is kind of where you see that because you're in Luxembourg and Luxembourg is not a good market for you or whatever, like there's a lot of really cheap platforms. The technology cost that once we had for a tech stack at this stage to cost thousands, now they cost $50. But you want to be there. You want to be where those buyers are, interact, and get informed and buy. The second is you need to figure out how people like to buy. Your ideal customer profiles, your buyers. How do they like to buy? If you already spoke to 5 or 10 of them, you pitch them for 5 minutes, then you send them a proposal, give them a free trial, and you never hear from them again. That should tell you something. You probably have to reconsider the way you do it, right? So finding out how people buy, besides where they are, it's the second thing. And then the last thing I think is which buyer is the right kind of buyer for the stage that you're in. Not all buyers are equal or the same. Some feel right? They give you feedback, they engage with you, they recommend you, and they renew. Others don't. And I think when it comes to saving costs or building kind of lean strategies, the best strategy is to just be hyper focused on the people you get the most out, the places that these people are in. And you should try things initially, but don't try to build an inbound process when this is going to take a year and you don't have that, right? So if you do this right, I think you have automatically built your first strategy, whether you call it like that or not. If you only focus on the buyer experience instead of kind of running around headless chickens to try different things because you saw a LinkedIn post about how to do this and that and that. And like I said before, you decide that this isn't the channels and you're wrong about your hypothesis. It has become a lot cheaper for you to try outbound and campaigns and all that stuff. Essentially, you want to come out of this exercise initially with three things, right? The ability to consistently speak to the right people, right? If you find them at the right place, to consistently kind of convert these people to paying customers, and to consistently retain them or even upsell them a little bit. I think if you come out of that exercise with having a yes to all these three, you're on a pretty good path.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Panos. Hopefully, our listeners will take these strategies on board. And I have one last question for you, which was left by my previous guest. They left this question without knowing who they are leaving it for. The question reads, what drives you beyond money? And how does that purpose shape the decisions you make in your business?
Drives me beyond money. Look, money itself isn't a drive. It's the things that you can do. It's funny because my number one drive is something financial, but something that has something to do with my lifestyle, stability, helping family and things. So I don't think I can answer what drives me outside of money, because most of the things that drive me require some sort of money to be able to do that. Whether it's go surf, buy a house and have a family, which is for me, most likely the next step, and supporting my family. And that's why I've been in sales and that's why I've always done it. But money itself isn't the drive. The drive is, the purpose and kind of what you're trying to do with that. So I don't know if that was a good answer, but it was the wrong person to ask, because to me, that's super important.
Well, I agree to an extent, right? Money is the means, not the outcome. That I think for a lot of people, the outcome might be something else. Like you said, building a family, being able to provide and support and do kind of pursue and live the lifestyle that you desire. And then money kind of enables you. It's an enabler for you to be able to then achieve greater and more, maybe much more valuable things than the money. Yeah, well, Panos, thank you so much. This was such a wide ranging and engaging conversation. I have learned a lot from your insights as a salesperson, as well as how your personal career as a salesperson have evolved at Talkwalker, but also beyond. And thank you so much also for sharing your personal stories, as well as providing some tips and strategies for entrepreneurs and founders who are oftentimes really have tight resources, and they also might struggle with mindset, mental blocks, right? Having maybe negative perception of selling and feeling uncomfortable to sell. And I think you have demonstrated today of the importance of embracing sales, improving our sales skills, and how it is essential as a human to human interaction, as opposed to just trying to push products or services onto other people. And you have also highlighted the importance of building human connections. People buy from people, and it is so important to be able to connect, build rapport, as well as show credibility and trust. So people want to buy from you as opposed to you trying to push your product. So thank you so much for sharing all of this, Panos.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for not asking another AI question around sales. That
My
was
pleasure.
refreshing.
My pleasure. Thank you so much,
All
Panos,
right,
for being on
Dushan.
the Inside Story podcast.